Don't you dare walk away from me. His fingers dug into her arm hard enough to make her gasp. The pastry boxes lurched in Hazel Grayson's grip, macarons rattling like tiny warnings against cardboard. She'd made it halfway across the hotel lobby, past the fountain, past the concierge desk, almost to the elevators before Elijah Vance's voice had cut through the air like a blade. She should have taken the service entrance. Let go. The words scraped out of her throat, small and desperate, nothing like the strong refusal she'd practiced in her mirror for months. 4 months of silence, and that's all you have to say to me? Elijah stepped closer, cologne suffocating, his perfectly tailored suit and camera-ready smile masking the fury burning in his eyes. To anyone watching, they probably looked like lovers having a spat. Nobody could see his thumb pressing into the soft underside of her wrist, finding the exact spot that sent pain shooting up her arm. I deserve an explanation, Hazel. A macaron tumbled free, shattering pink against white marble. Deserve. The word made her stomach turn. He deserved nothing, not her time, not her words, certainly not her fear. But her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, and his grip was tightening, and the lobby suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, too much like a trap closing around her. There's nothing to explain. She tugged against his hold, boxes wobbling dangerously. I moved on. You need to do the same. His laugh was sharp enough to cut. You don't just move on from what we had, from what we were, what they were. A girl too young to know better and a man too skilled at making her doubt herself. Late-night apologies that felt like love. Mornings where she walked on eggshells. Months of bending and breaking and convincing herself this was normal, that his jealousy meant he cared, that his anger was her fault. She'd finally escaped. She wouldn't go back, but standing here, feeling his fingers bruising her skin, she was 17 again and powerless. Elijah, please. I love you. He said it like a threat, not a promise. His free hand reached for her face, fingers grazing her cheek with a gentleness that made her want to scream. I never stopped. We can fix this. Whatever you think I did wrong, whatever misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Her voice cracked. We're done. We've been done. The shift in his expression was instant hurt melting into something cold and cruel, something she recognized from the worst nights. After everything I gave you, everything I did for you, you ungrateful little, she moved without thinking. Wrenched her arm free with enough force to send the top box flying, eclairs exploding across expensive tile. A woman near the fountain gasped. A bellhop started forward. Hazel didn't wait. Her legs carried her toward the elevator bank, sneakers squeaking against marble, pulse roaring in her ears. The elevator doors stood open. Empty. Salvation. She threw herself inside, boxes crushed against her chest, and slammed her palm against the close button. Again. Again. Frantic prayer translated into desperate motion. Her hands shook so violently she could barely keep her grip. Through the narrowing gap between the doors, she saw Elijah standing motionless in the ruined pastries, watching her with an expression that promised this wasn't over. Not even close. The doors sealed shut. The elevator lurched upward. Did Hazel just escape a stalker only to trap herself with a killer? Click subscribe and turn on notifications to find out what happens when the Mafia boss, Mateo Wyatt, finally speaks. Hazel collapsed against the back wall, gasping for air that wouldn't come fast enough. Safe. She was safe. The panic would fade. The shaking would stop. She just needed a moment to remember she'd survived him before, that she was stronger now, that he couldn't. Rough day? Her head snapped up. She wasn't alone. The figure stood in the corner, perfectly still, like he'd been carved from shadow and expensive fabric. Tall, taller than Elijah, broader through the shoulders, with a presence that filled the small space without him moving an inch. Dark suit, darker eyes, watching her with the kind of attention that made her skin prickle. Hazel's breath hitched. She pressed herself against the back wall, pastry boxes clutched like a shield. I'm sorry, I thought it was empty. He didn't respond. Just studied her with an intensity that felt surgical, cataloging the trembling hands, the wild eyes, the smudge of chocolate on her wrist where a macaron had exploded. Outside, muffled through the elevator doors, Elijah's voice rose in fury. Hazel, open this door. We're not finished. The pounding started fists against metal, rattling the frame. Her stomach dropped. The elevator was moving but not fast enough. Never fast enough. And Elijah was going to find a way to stop it, to drag her back out, to breathe. The The stranger's voice cut through her spiral. Low, quiet, with an edge of command that made her lungs obey before her brain caught up. She sucked in air, tasting her own panic. "He can't reach you here," the man continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "The doors are sealed. The elevator won't stop until the penthouse." Penthouse, of course. She'd hit the wrong button in her desperation, sent them straight to the top floor instead of her delivery stop on 12, which meant she was trapped with a stranger who looked like he belonged in boardrooms or courtrooms or somewhere far more dangerous. "I'll get off on the next floor," she managed, voice threadbare. "I didn't mean to. Stay still." It wasn't a suggestion. His eyes had shifted past her, focusing on something she couldn't see, and his expression changed. The calm sharpened into something colder, more lethal. He moved, then smooth, deliberate, positioning himself between her and the doors as the elevator slowed. They weren't at the penthouse yet. Someone had called the car. Hazel's pulse spiked. Elijah. He'd found the stairs, or another elevator, or convinced some poor hotel worker to stop this one. The doors would open and he'd be there, and this stranger wouldn't understand, wouldn't care, wouldn't. The elevator jolted to a halt. The doors began to slide open, but it wasn't Elijah on the other side. It was a woman in her 60s, designer handbag, irritated expression melting into surprise as she took in the scene. Hazel pressed against the wall like a cornered animal, boxes crushed to her chest, and the stranger standing in front of her like a human barrier. "Oh," the woman said. "I'll wait for the next one." The doors closed. The elevator resumed its climb. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Hazel's ragged breathing and the soft hum of machinery. The stranger turned back to face her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in those cold eyes. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. Who is he? The question was quiet but absolute. The man downstairs. Nobody. The lie tasted sour. Just someone I used to know. Someone you ran from. Not a question, an observation. Someone who put fear in your eyes and marks on your arm. Her hand instinctively covered the spot where Elijah's fingers had dug in, where bruises were already forming beneath her sleeve. How had he noticed? The lobby had been chaos, her escape frantic, and yet this stranger had seen what others missed. "It's handled," she said, though nothing about this felt handled. "I'll file a restraining order. Restraining orders are paper." His voice remained even, factual. "Paper doesn't stop men like him." The elevator chimed. Penthouse. The doors opened onto a private vestibule, marble floors, abstract art, a door that probably cost more than her entire apartment. The stranger stepped out, then paused, looking back at her. "You should exit here. Give him time to lose interest downstairs." It made sense, practical, safe. But Hazel hesitated, suddenly aware of how little she knew about this man, how isolated this floor was, how stupid she'd be to follow a stranger into. "I'm not him," he said, reading her hesitation with unnerving accuracy. "You're not in danger here." Something in his tone, not gentle, but honest, made her believe him. Or maybe she was just too exhausted to care anymore, too wrung out from fear and adrenaline to make smart decisions. She stepped forward on shaking legs. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing her on the penthouse floor with a man whose name she didn't know. He walked to the door, pressed his palm against a scanner, and it opened soundlessly. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling below them, lights glittering like scattered diamonds. The space was immaculate. Modern furniture, clean lines, not a single personal touch visible. It felt more like a showroom than a home. "Sit." He gestured to a sofa. "I'll get water." Hazel sank down, boxes finally leaving her grip, settling beside her like defeated soldiers. Her hands were still shaking. She laced her fingers together, trying to steady them, trying to remember how to be a person instead of just a collection of fears. He returned with 2 glasses, handed her one, then sat across from her in a leather chair, close enough to observe, far enough to give space. "Tell me his name," he said. "Why?" "Because men who hurt women don't stop on their own." He took a measured sip. "And I don't like leaving problems unsolved." The elevator had stalled. Hazel noticed it first when the floor indicator froze between 17 and 18, the gentle hum of movement dying into stillness. Her stomach clenched. Trapped. She was trapped in a metal box with a stranger whose eyes held secrets she couldn't begin to guess. "Is this—" Her voice cracked. "Is it stuck?" "Temporarily." He didn't seem concerned. didn't reach for an emergency button or phone. Just settled back in his seat. Wait, no, they weren't sitting anymore. This was still the elevator. Her mind was fracturing, replaying the penthouse, the water, the question about Elijah's name that she hadn't answered. No, she blinked hard, reorienting. They were still in the elevator. It had stalled before reaching the penthouse. The stranger stood near the control panel, one hand resting casually against the wall, watching her with that same unsettling focus. Maintenance issue? She asked hopefully. Security measure. He tilted his head slightly. Someone tried to override the elevator's destination from the lobby. The system locked down as a precaution. Elijah. Of course. He'd probably charmed or threatened some desk clerk into accessing the controls. The thought made her skin crawl. How long until I decide we're ready to move. The stranger's voice remained mild, but steel ran beneath it. Which gives us time to talk. This was insane. She should be demanding he restart the elevator, should be calling for help, should be doing anything except standing here letting a stranger interrogate her. But something about him, the contained power, the absolute certainty made resistance feel futile. I don't even know your name, she said. Mateo Wyatt. He offered it simply, like it should mean something. It didn't, or maybe it did. Tickling some distant corner of her memory where she'd heard that name before, whispered in tones of respect or fear. But she couldn't place it. Hazel Grayson. Fair exchange, even if hers came out less steady. I know. At her startled look, he gestured to the boxes. Your bakery logo. Grayson's Artisan Pastries. You deliver to the hotel twice weekly, Thursdays and Sundays. You always take the service entrance. The level of detail should have frightened her. Instead, it just made her tired. You've been watching me? I noticed patterns. Mateo's gaze never wavered. And you broke yours today. Came through the main entrance. Rushed. Scared. Which means something changed. He read people the way she read recipes, measuring ingredients, predicting outcomes. The realization settled over her like cold water. The man downstairs, Mateo continued. Elijah, that's his name, yes? She hadn't told him, hadn't said it out loud. But he'd heard it through the doors, probably, when Elijah was shouting. Yes, Hazel admitted, exhaustion bleeding into the word. Elijah Vance, my ex-boyfriend. How long since you left him? 4 months. And he's still pursuing you. Not a question. An assessment. She nodded anyway, feeling the weight of those months pressing down the blocked numbers, the surprise visits to her apartment, the flowers left on her car, the constant sense of being watched. He thinks we're meant to be together, she said flatly. That I just need time to remember how good we were. Were you good together? The question landed like a slap. No one ever asked that. They assumed, based on Elijah's charm and success, that she'd been lucky to have him. That leaving had been a mistake she'd regret. No. The truth felt sharp in her mouth. He was controlling, jealous. He didn't hit me, but... She stopped, unsure how to explain the 1,000 small cruelties that didn't leave visible marks. Abuse doesn't require fists, Mateo said quietly. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his voice had a note of understanding that suggested personal knowledge. It just requires power, and the willingness to use it. Hazel's throat tightened. 4 months of therapy, of rebuilding herself, of learning to trust her own reality again, and this stranger had summed it up in one sentence. Why do you care? She asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. True. Mateo was silent for a moment, studying her like she was a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve. But I don't like men who corner women in hotel lobbies, and I especially don't like them trying to override my elevator. His elevator. The possessive phrasing registered belatedly. This wasn't just any penthouse floor, it was his floor. His building, maybe. Which meant he wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful. What do you do, Mr. Wyatt? I solve problems. The non-answer raised more questions than it settled. Hazel opened her mouth to press further, but Mateo moved first, reaching into his jacket and pulling out his phone. He pressed something on the screen. The elevator shuddered, then resumed its upward climb. Your delivery is late, he said. Floor 12. The conference room staff will be waiting. He was letting her go, offering escape from this strange, suspended moment. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt oddly reluctant, like stepping back into the normal world meant losing something she couldn't name. The elevator slowed. Floor 12 appeared on the display. Thank you, Hazel said, gathering her boxes. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Mateo's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something almost warm in them. Almost, this isn't finished. The doors opened. She stepped out, glancing back once to find him still watching her, expression unreadable. Then the doors closed, taking him up to his penthouse and leaving her in the ordinary world with her pastries and her racing heart. She didn't understand what he'd meant, didn't understand why a stranger would care about her problems or why his attention felt less threatening than Elijah's had ever been. But as she made her delivery, smiled at the conference room staff, and took the service stairs back down to avoid the lobby, one thought circled her mind. Mateo Wyatt saw her. Really saw her. Not as a possession or a prize, but as a person who deserved safety. And somehow, that changed everything. Hazel didn't expect to see him again. 3 days passed. She returned to her small apartment above the bakery, threw herself into work, and tried to forget the intensity of Mateo Wyatt's gaze. Tried to forget how safe she'd felt in that stalled elevator, how seen. Elijah had gone quiet. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like she was waiting for a storm she couldn't see yet. It broke on a Tuesday evening. She was closing up the bakery, wiping down counters and boxing up leftover pastries for the shelter, when the bell above the door chimed. Her stomach dropped. She'd locked that door 10 minutes ago. But it wasn't Elijah who walked in. Mateo Wyatt stood in her bakery wearing the same dark suit, same unreadable expression, looking absurdly out of place among the cheerful displays and pastel walls. He surveyed the space with the same attention he'd given her, cataloging, assessing, measuring. "We're closed," Hazel said, then immediately felt stupid. Obviously, he knew that. He'd unlocked her door somehow. "I know." Mateo's gaze settled on her. "I came to talk." "About what?" "Your problem, and my solution." He moved deeper into the bakery, stopping at a small table near the window. Sat down like he owned the place, like he had every right to be there. Hazel stayed behind the counter, maintaining distance even as curiosity pulled at her. "I don't have a problem," she lied. "Elijah Vance filed 3 police reports in the last 72 hours. Mateo's voice remained conversational. "Claimed you stole from him, harassed him, made threats. All false, of course, but the reports exist now, building a paper trail to make you look unstable." The blood drained from her face. She'd wondered why Elijah had gone quiet. Now she knew. He was changing tactics, weaponizing the system against her. "How do you know this?" "I know many things." Mateo leaned back in his chair. "I also know he's been following you, documenting your routine. He hired a private investigator to find leveraged debts, mistakes, anything he can use." Panic clawed up Hazel's throat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can make it stop." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Hazel moved around the counter slowly, legs unsteady, and sank into the chair across from him. "How? By making you untouchable." Mateo's dark eyes held hers. Men like Elijah are predators. They target women they perceive as vulnerable, isolated. But if you belong to someone more dangerous than him, someone he fears, he'll disappear. "Belong to." The phrasing made her skin prickle. "You mean, not literally." Mateo's expression didn't change, but something in his tone gentled slightly. "I'm proposing an arrangement. 6 months as my public fiancé. You attend events with me, wear my ring, live in my penthouse. In exchange, I ensure Elijah and his investigators vanish from your life permanently." Hazel stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want me to fake an engagement?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I need the appearance of stability." He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing a business merger. "My work requires certain perceptions. A fiancé provides legitimacy, softens my image, and you need protection I can provide." Her mind reeled. This was insane. She didn't know this man, didn't understand what work required a fake fiancé, or why someone like him would need to soften his image. Everything about this screamed danger. But Elijah was building a case against her, making her look crazy, and restraining orders were just paper, like Mateo had said. "What would you expect from me?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. "Besides appearing in public, presence, believability, basic companionship at events." Mateo paused, letting each word land with deliberate weight. "No intimacy, no physical expectations beyond what's necessary for appearances, hand-holding, standing close. Your boundaries remain yours, and after 6 months, we stage a quiet mutual separation." You leave with enough money to expand your bakery, relocate if you choose, and start fresh. Clean slate. No Elijah, no threats. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? Hazel asked. My world is not safe. Mateo's honesty was almost brutal. Being associated with me comes with risks. There are people who might try to use you to get to me. That's why you'd live in my penthouse security, protection, guards. You'd need to follow certain rules. What kind of rules? Where you go, who you see, what information you share. He leaned forward slightly. I would control your visibility to keep you safe. That might feel suffocating. From Elijah's control to Mateo's. The irony wasn't lost on her. The difference, Mateo said, reading her expression again, is that my control protects you. His controlled you. And at the end of 6 months, you walk away free. That's a guarantee. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. His bluntness was startling. You don't know me. But trust and necessity aren't the same thing. You need help. I can provide it. The question is whether you're desperate enough to accept. Desperate, the word echoed in the empty bakery. Was she? 3 days ago, she would have said no. But now, knowing Elijah was building a case, following her, hiring investigators. I need time to think, Hazel said. You have until Friday. Mateo stood, pulling a card from his pocket and setting it on the table. My private number. Call with your answer. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Miss Grayson, I don't make offers I don't intend to honor. If you accept, you'll be under my protection, completely. Then he was gone, leaving Hazel alone with a business card and a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. She called on Thursday night. Her hands shook as she dialed the number, as Mateo answered on the second ring, as she heard herself say, I accept. There was a pause. Then, I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Bring what matters. Everything else will be provided. The line went dead. Hazel stared at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to, wondering if this was salvation or a different kind of trap. But Elijah's last text message glowed on her screen. I know where you sleep, Hazel. We need to talk. Soon. She packed that night, filling 2 suitcases with clothes and her grandmother's cookbook and the photo albums that held her only family memories. Everything else, the mismatched furniture, the thrift store dishes, could stay. At 5:47 a.m., a black car pulled up outside her bakery. The driver was professional, silent, opening her door and loading her bags without a word. The drive to Mateo's building took 15 minutes through early morning streets. They bypassed the lobby entirely, entering through a private garage that required 3 separate security checks. His elevator carried her to the penthouse. Mateo waited in the doorway, dressed more casually than before in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked almost human like this. Almost, welcome home, he said, and the words carried weight she wasn't ready to unpack. The penthouse was exactly as she remembered, clean lines, expensive emptiness, windows that framed the city like a painting. But Mateo led her past the main living space to a hallway she hadn't seen before, opening the second door on the left. Your room, he said. It was beautiful, soft grays and whites, a bed that looked like sleeping on a cloud, an ensuite bathroom visible through an open door. Everything carefully neutral, carefully impersonal, a blank canvas. Make it yours, Mateo added, as if sensing her thoughts. This is your space. I won't enter without permission. That surprised her. Even though this is fake? Especially because it's fake. His dark eyes met hers. Respecting boundaries isn't conditional on the nature of our arrangement. It's baseline decency. Elijah had never understood that. Had treated her apartment, her phone, her thoughts like they belonged to him. Hearing Mateo state the opposite so plainly made something in her chest crack open. Thank you, she whispered. Mateo nodded once, then stepped back. Unpack. Settle in. We'll discuss details over breakfast, 8 o'clock in the dining room. The kitchen staff will prepare whatever you'd like. Kitchen staff. Of course he had kitchen staff. He turned to leave, then paused. Hazel? Yes? You made the right choice. I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you're safe now. The door closed softly behind him. Hazel stood in her new room, in her fake fiancé's penthouse, and for the first time in 4 months, she let herself believe it might be true. The first week was an adjustment in every possible way. Hazel learned quickly that Mateo's world operated on rules she'd never encountered. Guards stationed at every entrance, silent and efficient. Staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts cooking, cleaning, maintaining the penthouse without ever being intrusive. Schedules that ran with military precision. And Mateo himself, who moved through it all like a dark star, pulling everything into his orbit. He'd meant what he said about boundaries. Her room remained hers. He knocked before entering shared spaces when she was there. He never touched her without purpose, a hand at her elbow when guiding her somewhere, fingertips at her lower back when introducing her to someone. Each contact was brief, respectful, calculated. It should have felt cold. Instead, it felt safe. "You'll need a new wardrobe," Mateo said over breakfast on day 3, sliding a black credit card across the table. "For events. The stylist will be here this afternoon." Hazel stared at the card. "I can't." "You can and will." His tone left no room for argument. "You're representing me now. That requires certain standards." It wasn't cruel, just factual, but it still made her feel small, like she wasn't enough as she was. Mateo must have seen something in her expression because he added, more gently, "You're lovely, Hazel. This isn't about changing you. It's about armor. The people we'll encounter are predators in expensive suits. They'll look for weakness. We won't give them any." The stylist arrived at 2 p.m. A sharp-eyed woman named Celeste, who sized Hazel up in seconds and nodded approvingly. "Good bones. Classic features. We'll build from there." 3 hours later, Hazel's closet held more clothes than she'd owned in her entire life. Dresses, suits, casual wear, shoes that cost more than her monthly rent used to. Everything fit perfectly, tailored to her measurements, chosen to complement without overwhelming. "You look like you belong here now," Celeste said with satisfaction. Hazel wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. The rules came gradually, introduced as situations arose. "Don't leave the building without security," Mateo said when she mentioned wanting to check on her bakery. "Marco will drive you. He's former military. Trustworthy." Marco turned out to be a mountain of a man with kind eyes and an easygoing manner that made the surveillance feel less oppressive. He drove her to the bakery, waited outside, checked every room before letting her enter. When she asked why, he just smiled sadly. "Mr. Wyatt's enemies would love to find a pressure point," Marco explained. "You're that now. We can't let our guard down." The weight of that settled over her. She wasn't just Mateo's fake fiancée. She was his vulnerability, his weakness. But if she was so important to protect, why had he chosen her at all? The question burned until she finally asked him directly one evening. They were in his study, a dark-paneled room filled with books and leather furniture, going over the guest list for an upcoming gallery event. "Why me?" Hazel's voice cut through his explanation of who mattered and who didn't. "There must be hundreds of women who'd play this role. Women who already know your world. Why pick someone from a bakery?" Mateo set down his pen, studying her with that unnerving focus. "Because you needed help. And because women from my world would expect more than I'm offering. More reality." He leaned back in his chair. "They'd want this arrangement to become genuine. Would push boundaries, create complications. You just want safety and freedom at the end. That's honest, simple, preferable." It made sense in a clinical way, but something about his answer felt incomplete, like he was leaving pieces out. "What do you get besides a softened image?" Hazel pressed. "Really?" Mateo was quiet for a long moment. Then, peace. "The assumption that I'm settled, domesticated. It makes certain business dealings smoother when people think I have someone to lose. Someone to lose." The phrasing stuck with her. "Do you?" she asked. "Have someone to lose?" His expression shuddered. Not anymore. The past tense carried weight, grief, or regret, or something darker she couldn't name. Hazel didn't push further, sensing the boundary even if she didn't fully understand it. The surprises came in small moments. Mateo brought home pastries from her bakery every Thursday. Not for him, he rarely ate sweets. For her, "I know you've been missing your routine," he'd say, setting the familiar boxes on the kitchen counter. He respected her work, never diminishing her bakery as a hobby the way Elijah had, asked intelligent questions about recipes and techniques, offered business advice that was actually useful contacts for suppliers, strategies for expansion. He protected her privacy fiercely. When his mother called demanding to meet the new fiancé, Mateo shut her down with cold efficiency. "Not yet. When Hazel's ready." He never asked when that would be, just gave her space to adjust. And slowly, Against all logic, Hazel stopped jumping at every noise. Stopped checking over her shoulder constantly. Stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. The penthouse became home, which terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Because this was temporary. An arrangement with an expiration date. 6 months and she'd leave. Return to her life, her bakery, her freedom. But every morning over coffee, every evening discussing mundane details of their days, every moment Mateo treated her like she mattered not as possession but as person, made the inevitable ending feel less like freedom and more like loss. She was getting too comfortable, too attached, and she had no idea how to stop it. The Silverton Gallery occupied 3 floors of sleek architecture and pretentious art. Hazel stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the neckline of her dress for the 100th time, trying to calm the riot of nerves in her stomach. This was it. Their first public appearance as an engaged couple. The dress Celeste had chosen was midnight blue, elegant without being flashy, fitted through the bodice and flowing at the skirt. Diamonds, real diamonds, glittered at her throat and ears, on loan from some vault Hazel didn't want to think about. Her reflection looked expensive, polished, like she belonged in Mateo's world. The lie was convincing even to her. "Ready?" Mateo's voice came from the doorway. She turned, breath-catching. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been painted on, dark hair styled back, and an expression that managed to be both bored and intensely alert. He looked dangerous, powerful. Every inch the man whose protection she'd accepted. "As I'll ever be," Hazel managed. Mateo crossed to her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside sat a ring platinum band with a single emerald flanked by diamonds. It was stunning, understated but unmistakably valuable. "Your engagement ring," he said. "May I?" She offered her left hand, surprised when it didn't shake. Mateo slid the ring onto her finger with the same careful precision he applied to everything. It fit perfectly, catching the light as she moved. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It matches your eyes." He said it matter-of-factly, but something in his tone suggested he'd chosen it specifically for that reason. "The press will photograph everything tonight. Stay close to me. Answer questions with vague pleasantries. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, squeeze my hand twice. I'll extract us. A signal. An escape plan." Even in this controlled environment, Mateo was protecting her. Marco drove them to the gallery in the usual black car, 2 additional security vehicles flanking them. The motorcade felt excessive until they pulled up to the entrance, and Hazel saw the crowd, photographers, reporters, curious onlookers, pressing against velvet ropes. "It's always like this?" she asked, voice tight. "Usually worse." Mateo's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Just breathe. Follow my lead. You'll be fine." The door opened. Flashbulbs exploded. Mateo stepped out first, turning to offer his hand with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Hazel took it, letting him guide her onto the red carpet, into the wall of light and noise. "Mateo, over here. Who's the lady? Is it true you're engaged?" The questions came rapid fire, overlapping, relentless. Mateo's hand settled at her waist, pulling her against his side as they moved forward. His touch was possessive in a way that made the cameras go wild but didn't feel threatening. Just present. "Gentlemen," Mateo addressed the press with cool authority. "This is my fiancée, Hazel Grayson. We'd appreciate privacy during this special time." Which of course guaranteed they'd have none, but it established the narrative. Serious relationship, protective fiancé, woman who belonged under his arm. They made it inside, and Hazel's lungs finally remembered how to work properly. The gallery interior was all white walls and dramatic lighting, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her bakery, and people who looked like they'd been carved from ice and ambition. Waiters circulated with champagne and tiny, architectural food that Hazel couldn't identify. "You did well," Mateo murmured, accepting 2 glasses and handing her one. "Breathe. The hard part's over." But his body language suggested otherwise. Every line of him remained coiled, alert, scanning the room like he expected an attack from any angle. "What are you looking for?" Hazel asked quietly. "Threats." He sipped his champagne without really drinking. At events like this, everyone wants something. Money, power, information, connection. Were the evening's entertainment new blood for old sharks? The metaphor was uncomfortably accurate. Already, people were drifting toward them with calculated casualness, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mateo navigated it masterfully. introduced her to business partners, art collectors, society figures whose names she immediately forgot. His hand never left her waist. Lower back, hand clasping hers. Each touch reinforced the message. She was his, claimed, protected, and something about that should have bothered her more than it did. An hour in, they were admiring a particularly ugly sculpture when Hazel felt Mateo's entire body go rigid beside her. His grip on her waist tightened. Not painfully, but noticeably. "We need to move," he said, voice low and urgent. "Why?" "Mateo Wyatt." The voice came from behind them, smooth and dangerous as silk over razors. Mateo turned slowly, positioning Hazel slightly behind him. The man approaching was tall, well-dressed, with silver threading his dark hair and a smile that made her skin crawl. Everything about him screamed danger, but the polished kind that hid behind expensive suits and perfect manners. "Marco," Mateo said, voice flat as stone. Not Marco, her driver, a different Marco. And from the tension radiating off Mateo, a very unwelcome one. "I heard congratulations are in order." The man Marco Scarlatti, she realized. The rival Mateo had mentioned studied Hazel with predatory interest. "She's lovely, very different from your usual type." "That's the point." Mateo's tone could have frozen fire. Scarlatti laughed, the sound carrying no warmth. "Always so hostile, Mateo. We're not enemies tonight, just two businessmen admiring art." His gaze slid back to Hazel. "Has he told you what he does for a living, pretty girl? Or does he keep you sheltered from the ugly parts?" "We were just leaving," Mateo said, already guiding Hazel away. But Scarlatti moved with them, matching their pace. "I only ask because men in our line of work tend to have complicated relationships, dangerous ones. Wives and fiancés become liabilities so quickly." Hazel's pulse kicked up. The words were casual, but the threat underneath was clear. "Touch her," Mateo said quietly, stopping to face Scarlatti directly. "And I will dismantle everything you've built. Slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but debt and regret." The gallery seemed to hold its breath. Other guests noticed the confrontation, conversations faltering, attention shifting their direction. Scarlatti raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for threats. I'm simply saying she should know what she's getting into. The dangers of being attached to you." He smiled at Hazel, and it was worse than any glare. "Has he mentioned Elijah Vance yet? I hear that situation's been handled very thoroughly." The room tilted. Hazel's hand found Mateo's arm, squeezing twice their signal, but he was already moving, steering her toward the exit with controlled urgency. "What did he mean?" she asked once they were in the car. Marco, her Marco, already pulling away from the gallery. "About Elijah?" Mateo's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on something out the window. "That I kept my promise? Your ex won't bother you again." "Mateo, don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Hazel." He finally looked at her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. "I told you my world isn't safe." Scarlatti just gave you a preview of why. They rode the rest of the way in silence, tension thick enough to choke on. Back in the penthouse, Mateo went straight to his study without a word. Hazel stood in the entryway, still wearing her beautiful dress and her real diamonds, feeling like she'd just glimpsed something she couldn't unsee. Elijah was handled. Thoroughly. What did that mean? What had Mateo done? And why did part of her not want to know, while another part desperately needed to? She touched the emerald ring on her finger, feeling its weight for the first time. Not just jewelry, a symbol, a claim, a warning to anyone who might threaten what was his. Even if what was his wasn't real, even if she was just playing a role that would end in 5 more months. The line between pretend and reality was blurring faster than she'd anticipated, and Hazel had no idea how to stop it. 3 days after the gallery, Mateo came home with blood on his knuckles. Hazel was in the kitchen when he walked in. Not her usual space, but the penthouse kitchen was spectacular, and she'd asked the staff for permission to bake. Kneading dough helped calm her mind, and God knew she needed calming after the gallery night. She'd avoided Mateo since then. Not dramatically, they still shared meals, still went over their engagement plans, but the easy comfort that had been building between them felt fractured. Every time she looked at him, she thought about Scarlatti's words, about Elijah being handled, about the ugly parts Mateo kept sheltered from her. But now he stood in the doorway, perfectly still except for his ragged breathing, and his right hand was split across the knuckles, blood seeping through his shirt cuff. What happened? Hazel abandoned her dough, crossing to him without thinking. Nothing that concerns you. But his voice was rougher than usual, strained. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I'm aware. Typical Mateo, deflecting, minimizing, keeping walls firmly in place. But Hazel had spent enough time with him now to read the signs. This wasn't nothing. This was something bad. Sit. She pointed to one of the kitchen stools. Let me see. Hazel. Sit, Mateo. She used his own tone of command, the one that didn't allow argument. Surprisingly, he obeyed, sinking onto the stool with the weariness of someone who'd been fighting battles for too long. She gathered Supply's first aid kit from under the sink, warm water, clean towels, and set to work cleaning his hand. The cuts weren't deep, but they were brutal, the kind you got from hitting something solid. Or someone. Was it Scarlatti? She asked, dabbing antiseptic as gently as possible. Mateo hissed but didn't pull away. His people sent a message through one of my warehouses. Thought I needed reminding that he's still a threat, and you reminded him back. Something like that. He watched her work, expression softening slightly. You didn't have to do this. You've protected me for weeks, Hazel said, wrapping gauze around his knuckles. Least I can do is play nurse when you come home bloody. Home. The word slipped out naturally, and neither of them acknowledged it. She finished bandaging his hand and started to step back, but Mateo caught her wrist, the uninjured hand, gentle grip. I'm sorry you saw that. At the gallery, what Scarlatti said about Elijah. Did you kill him? The question emerged before Hazel could stop it, blunt and terrifying. No. Mateo's dark eyes held hers steadily, but I made it very clear what would happen if he ever approached you again. He's relocated, different city, different life. He won't be back. Relief and horror twisted together in her chest. She should be appalled, should be demanding details, questioning his methods, but all she felt was safe, safer than she'd ever been. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me for doing what any decent person should do. Elijah would never have let me go that easily. Hazel's voice cracked. He'd have fought, escalated, made my life hell. You just ended it. Because I could. Mateo stood, towering over her in the small space. And because you deserved peace. That's all. But it wasn't all. She could see it in the way he looked at her, protective, possessive, something warmer underneath that he wouldn't name. This arrangement was supposed to be simple. 6 months. Business transaction. Nothing more. It hadn't been simple for a while now. Mateo. Her phone buzzed on the counter, shattering the moment. A text from an unknown number. Pretty girl in the blue dress. You looked scared at the gallery. Smart. You should be. Hazel's hands went numb. The phone clattered onto the counter. Mateo had it in seconds, reading the message, face going absolutely cold. When did this come in? Just now. I don't know that number. He was already dialing, phone to his ear. Marco, we have a problem. Scarlatti has her number. A pause. I don't care how. Find out and fix it. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean there's more? The color drained from his face. Hazel's stomach dropped. Understood. Triple security. Lock down the building. Nobody in or out without my direct approval. He hung up, jaw set in a way that promised violence. Pack a bag. Now. What? Why? Marco Scarlatti kidnapped Diana Volkov 3 hours ago. His voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms. She's the daughter of one of my business partners, 14 years old. Horror washed over her. Oh my God. Scarlatti sent photos. Demands. He wants me to back out of a port deal we're both bidding on. Mateo's hands were shaking the first time she'd seen him lose composure, and he sent a second message. About you. Said to ask me how much I value my pretty new toy. The words hit like physical blows. Hazel was next. The target had moved from vague threats to explicit danger. We're going to the safe house. Mateo continued, already moving toward his study. You'll stay there with a security team until this is resolved. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't have you in the line of fire. What about Diana? I'll handle it. How? He turned, and his expression was terrifying, all the civility stripped away, revealing something primal and lethal underneath. However, I have to. The safe house was a nondescript building in a wealthy suburb, surrounded by high walls and guards that Hazel counted at least 6 of before losing track. Inside, it was comfortable but sterile, like a nice hotel room with no personality. Mateo walked her through the space, pointing out security features, emergency exits. the panic button disguised as a light switch. His movements were mechanical, his voice flat. "Stay inside," he said. "Don't answer the door for anyone except Marco or me. If something feels wrong, hit the panic button. The team will extract you within 90 seconds. Mateo, promise me." He grabbed her shoulders. The first time he'd touched her with anything approaching desperation. "Promise you'll stay safe, that you won't do anything stupid trying to help." "I promise," Hazel whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, something unspoken burning in his eyes. Then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, brief, chaste, but carrying more weight than any kiss she'd experienced. "I'll come back for you," he said against her skin. "Just wait for me." Then he was gone, leaving her in a safe house with guards and fear, and the terrible certainty that the man she'd agreed to fake an engagement with was walking into something that might kill him. And she couldn't do anything but wait. 4 days passed like years. Hazel existed in a state of suspended terror, pacing the safe house, jumping at every noise, checking her phone obsessively for messages that never came. The guards were kind but unhelpful. They knew nothing, or wouldn't say if they did. Her Marco, visited twice, bringing clothes and food and reassurances that meant nothing. "He's handling it," was all he'd say. Have faith. Faith in what? A man she barely knew? A fake fiancé who'd somehow become real enough that his absence felt like missing a limb? On the 5th morning, the door opened. Mateo stood there looking like he'd been through a war. Bruises darkened his jaw and cheekbone. His suit was rumpled, tie missing, shirt stained with something that might have been blood. But his eyes, when they found her across the room, were alive, fierce, relieved. "It's over," he said. Hazel didn't remember crossing the space. One moment she was by the window. The next she was against his chest, arms wrapped around him, shaking with the force of emotions she couldn't name. "Diana?" Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "Safe. Reunited with her family this morning." Mateo's arms came around her slowly, like he was afraid she'd break. Or maybe like he was afraid he'd break. "Scarlatti won't hurt anyone again." The phrasing was careful, deliberate. Hazel understood what he wasn't saying. "Did you—" "Don't ask." His grip tightened. "Please, just don't ask." So she didn't. Just held him, feeling the exhaustion radiating from his body, the tremors he was trying to hide. This powerful, controlled man was falling apart in her arms, and all she could do was hold him together. "I thought," his voice cracked. "When he sent that message about you, I thought—" "I'm okay," Hazel said firmly. "I'm right here, safe, because of luck. Because I moved you fast enough." Mateo pulled back just enough to cup her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "If I'd been slower, if he'd gotten to you." But he didn't. This time. The words were raw, honest. "But there will be others. Men like Scarlatti don't exist in isolation. Being with me means being a target, always." He was giving her an out, offering to end the arrangement, release her from the danger his world represented. And Hazel knew the smart thing would be to take it, to walk away while she still could, before she got in any deeper. But looking at him exhausted, vulnerable, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world she couldn't imagine leaving. "Then we make me harder to target," she said. "Better security, more precautions, whatever it takes. Hazel, I'm not leaving." The certainty in her voice surprised even her. "Not because of the arrangement, because I want to stay." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, mixing with fear, mixing with something that looked dangerously close to joy. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Hazel's hands moved to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. "These 5 months living with you, getting to know you, it stopped being fake a long time ago. At least for me." Mateo went absolutely still. "What are you saying?" "That this isn't an arrangement anymore. That when I worry about you, it's real. When I wait for you to come home, it's real. She faltered, the words too big, too terrifying. "When I care about you, it's real." Hazel. Her name was a prayer, a warning, a plea all at once. "You can't, you're not what? Good." The word ripped out of him. "I'm not good for you. I'm violent and dangerous, and the kind of man who does things you shouldn't forgive. I'm not asking you to be good." Hazel held his gaze steadily. "I'm asking you to be honest, about what this is, about what you want it to be." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Mateo's control shattered. He kissed her desperate, fierce, like he'd been starving and she was sustenance. His hands tangled in her hair, hers fisted in his shirt, and the kiss went on until neither of them could breathe. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Mateo pressed his forehead to hers. "It stopped being an arrangement," he whispered, "the moment you ran into my arms in that elevator. I knew then. I just couldn't let myself want you." "Why not?" "Because wanting leads to losing, and I couldn't survive losing you." Hazel's chest cracked open. "You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. Neither can you. But we can choose to stay anyway." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Choose me, Mateo. For real this time." He stared at her like she'd offered him salvation and damnation in the same breath. Then, slowly, he nodded. "For real," he agreed. "But Hazel, I know. Dangerous. Complicated. All of it." She smiled despite everything. "I'm choosing it anyway." This kiss was different, slower, deeper, full of promise instead of desperation. When they finally made it back to the penthouse that evening, Hazel didn't go to her room. She went to his, and the fake engagement became something neither of them could pretend about anymore. 6 months came and went. Hazel's bakery expanded into 3 locations across the city. Funded by investments Mateo helped her secure. She hired staff, developed new recipes, built something that was entirely hers, but she came home to him every night. The penthouse transformed. Her things mixed with his cookbooks on his shelves, photos on walls that had been bare, warmth seeping into spaces that had felt sterile. She made it home. They made it home. The public engagement became private reality. No announcement, no big proposal, just the quiet understanding that the arrangement had evolved into something neither of them wanted to end. Mateo's world remained dangerous. There were still threats, still guards, still nights he came home with bruises and blood. But there were also mornings where he made her coffee, evenings where they cooked together, moments of peace carved from chaos. He was still the man who did terrible things to protect what was his. She accepted that, understood it. Even, in her darkest moments, appreciated it, because he protected her absolutely, loved her fiercely, gave her freedom within the safety he provided. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. One evening, nearly 8 months after that first elevator collision, they stood on his balcony watching the city lights. Mateo's arms wrapped around her from behind, chin resting on her head. "I have a question," he said quietly. The engagement. It was supposed to end after 6 months. Hazel's heart stuttered. "It was. We're past that now. We are. So what are we doing?" He turned her in his arms, dark eyes searching hers. "Continuing the arrangement? Or making it real?" She touched his face, feeling the familiar planes and angles. The new scar along his jaw from the fight with Scarlatti's men. This man who'd saved her, protected her, loved her despite every reason not to. "It stopped being an arrangement," Hazel said softly. "The moment you ran into my arms in that elevator." Mateo's expression cracked into something beautiful. "You're stealing my lines. Someone wise told them to me once." She smiled. "I'm just returning the favor." "Hazel Grayson." He said her name like a vow. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" The answer was easy. Had been easy since that first moment of feeling safe in his presence, of being seen and valued and protected. "Yes," she whispered. "For real this time." He kissed her as the city glittered around them. Their city, their life, their future, built from a fake arrangement and forged into something absolutely true. The doors of the elevator had closed on Hazel's past that day, and opened to a future neither of them expected. But one they'd chosen, together, absolutely, real,